Hello, my name is Alan Jones, and I welcome you to another live story coming to you from Live Stories Worldwide. We bring you stories from the UK and other countries, and they go out across the world. We are live on StreamYard, Facebook, YouTube. You can also watch us on our website, livestoriesworldwide.com, which is probably one of the easiest ways to watch. We bring you stories of people who've gone through all types of challenges and how they've overcome those challenges. Our guest today is from Exeter. His name is Andy Flannagan. Andy has been involved in worship and also written books, and he was involved in encouraging people to get involved in politics. And you'll hear more about that in his story. So I'm going to hand over to Andy, who's going to be interviewed by George. Thank you, Andy.
Good evening. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you very much, Alan. And thank you very much to you, Andy, of course, for coming here to visit us at Life Stories Worldwide. Now, first of all, Alan did make a slight mistake. You're not actually from Exeter, are you?
Well, I'm living in Exeter now, but as you can hear from the accent clearly, I'm from a great green part of the world, George, that you must know.
To be sure. So I should say, what about you?
Absolutely.
Now, tell us, Andy, what part of our Northern are you actually from?
So my mum and dad are from Portadown.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also spent 8 years growing up in Georgetown, North Belfast. So I'm sort of half town boy, half country boy. And so I worked as a doctor over there, but then I had a quite dramatic, you might call it Damascus Road experience of like an incredible collision of things happening to call me out of that work being a doctor to actually be involved in music and working with young people. And working with an evangelistic band for a thing called Youth for Christ in England, touring around the UK, sharing our testimony, sharing our faith, and seeing the most incredible transformation in so many young people across the UK. So yeah, it's been quite a transition from medicine to the music, and then from the music on towards politics now as well. Excellent.
Well, they say the Irish people have got the gift of the gab, so you'll be good in politics for definite. Now, growing up in Northern Ireland as you're a young man must have been tough for you because of the Troubles. Tell us a little bit about that. Did it affect you in any way at all?
No, not hugely. I think only in retrospect do you realise that everybody in that period of time was growing up with a certain level of low-lying anxiety that sort of felt normal to us, but actually looking back was probably affecting us more than we think. But in terms of actual violence, I heard one bomb in my life, the big Europa bomb in the early 90s. That's probably the only bomb I was actually ever close enough to hear, and the truth is, as with so many hotspots around the world, whether we're talking about the Middle East, whether we're talking about South Africa, those of us who are outside those places just watching it on the news kind of imagine the whole place to be going up in flames. But actually the truth was there were areas that it was, there were certain areas where you didn't want to be late at night, and there are certain areas that interface areas, especially where two communities were rubbing up against each other. There were places that were dangerous places to be, but for most other folks, it was relatively normal. Even though when you take a step back from it and you get away from it, you realize, gosh, what we were living in absolutely wasn't normal. Two communities living separately in the same country, and I think that realization, which you only work out as you get older, because whatever you grew up experiencing is what's normal for you. But I think it's one of the reasons why I'm so concerned as to what we see happening in the United States right now, and that you're almost getting to the stage where you've got two separate populations with two separate worldviews, two separate news and information sources living within the same community. And I guess the lesson of Northern Ireland is that we know where that ends up. It doesn't end up in a good place. And so I think that's why I've spent a lot of my life trying to bring people together who probably won't disagree on everything, but who can find common cause and can work together.
And growing up as a young lad, what was school like for you? I mean, what ambitions did you have when you were younger?
I was very, very privileged. The schools that I went to, I went to school in Belfast called Belfast Royal Academy, and then my hometown school, Portadown College, which my dad ended up actually becoming headmaster of, thankfully not while I was there, but it was a wonderful place, and saw some incredible things happen when I was there at school. You ask about what sort of dreams or visions that I might have wanted or had I think the truth is that I think I was so invested in every moment that I wasn't really necessarily looking forward that much. I was probably the last person in my school to fill in the forms, the UCAS forms to decide where to go to university or whatever. I was the last person. I was like weeks after everybody else because I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I was so engaged and excited about the moment. And in the end, I chose to do medicine, to become a doctor, not because I felt this real call to be a doctor, but because I always enjoyed doing sciences, but I also enjoyed talking to people. And I thought, well, the way of bringing those two things together would be to be a doctor. And also because I guess I grew up in a context where I'd have been shown lots of stories and videos and slideshows back in those days of people working in hospitals in Uganda or in Kenya who were working in hospitals in really impoverished parts of the world. And I saw those folks having an incredible impact. And I thought, well, do you know what? I wouldn't mind doing that. I wouldn't mind having a skill to be able to go and do that and help people on the far side of the world, having been exposed to that stuff. So I think that was the sort of stuff that was ticking through my head during school days. Little did I realize that I was not particularly well set up for doing that. Realizing when I went on a medical elective then to Egypt, 1994, and spent a summer in 45-degree heat, mostly horizontal, mostly on my back, mostly sick. I realized, this factor 45 white boy is probably not best cut out for doing stuff in the middle of nowhere. And it was also during that time, while I was a medical student, that's when I started to do a lot of singing. I started to get quite angry about the state of the world and the state of how many people were left behind. And for whom poverty was just a daily battle. I started to learn through work, people like Oxfam, Christian Aid, Tear Fund, started to learn about why that was the case and what some of the injustices of the global economic system that left people in that terrible state. And so I started to get quite angry and write about that and wrote songs about it. And during that time was when I started to see those songs being effective and people started asking me to sing them in various places. And that's when a different future started to seem possible to me. That wasn't just my medical work, that actually I would end up doing quite a lot of singing. But it was actually through some of those experiences in those foreign hospitals that I actually got to be able to then start singing. And it was really through people's response to that music that I realized, gosh, there's a job to be done here. That and there's a guy called George Verwer spoke at a meeting in Belfast, and he said in the study of the world today, he said, we don't really need more missionaries. He said, we need people who I would call senders, people who have a heart for away, the rest of the world, but who are gifted in communicating about that at home. And who he called sender. And it was just like this sense of like, I've just like felt something like landed in my guts that night. Going like, I remember shaking a friend and going like, I think that's me. Because I'm really passionate about these issues. I'm passionate about the state of the world, but these songs seem to be working, and these events that I'm organizing in the first world seem to be working and seem to be effective. And so I guess that's been a banner over my life since then, that I'm doing sending, that I'm maybe not the person who's being sent to the mission place, to the mission field, but actually I'm the one who's encouraging the other folks to go, looking after them as they go. And so I've been doing that for a long time through singing and the work with Tear Fund, but now more specifically in the world of politics, calling people into that particular mission field and looking after them as they go.
Now, what was life growing up in the family? You mentioned your daddy became the headmaster of the college and that in Portadown. What was life like for you, say in the family environment with brothers and sisters? What was it like for you?
Yeah, wonderful sister called Ruth, 3 years younger than me, who's become a physiotherapist and married one of my best friends at the time, John, one of my best friends from uni. He's called John Alderdice, and he basically used me to get to my sister and married her. But is now president of the Methodist Church in Ireland this year, in fact. Wow. John's a wonderful guy as well. Couldn't have picked anybody better to be becoming part of our family. And then my wonderful dad, who you've heard about, and then my wonderful mum, who's the backbone of it all, Sylvia and Tom. So they're presently without power in their house in Northern Ireland. They're one of the hundreds of thousands of people who still don't have any electricity. So they sort of managed it for a few days, but they've now decamped to a hotel. Bless them. So, but yeah, owe those guys so much, and the support and the love of them and the encouragement from them, especially when they were, put a lot of investment and time into me going on this journey into medical school, and then feeling like that wasn't going to be the end point of the journey. It was just going to be the start of the journey. That's not necessarily the easiest thing for a parent to hear. But over the years, they've seen that, that I was being led, that it was a, I don't know if people listening to this, I don't know whether you believe in God or not, but I've got so many stories to tell about how it was really clear that God made it really clear to me that he was leading me in a certain direction. Like ridiculous things happened. I was basically working in the hospital at the time, and I saw 3 separate friends during a week I had off. 3 separate friends brought three of them brought exactly the same job advert up to me where I was staying separately without any collusion. All had exactly the same advert saying, "Oh, we think you should apply for this job." And I was like, okay, wow, 3 of you in a week have now said exactly the same thing. That's quite random. It was a job leading a band in England. So I remember thinking, well, okay, that's interesting. I should probably pursue that. But then I just got a little bit insecure because you had to send a tape, you had to send off a demo, a recording, and I hadn't really done that too much, and I thought, oh no, I don't want to do that. And so I remember the closing date passed. It was April the 22nd, 1997. Closing date passed, and I remember it was a couple of weeks after that I rang up the organization Youth for Christ and said, "Oh, did you ever appoint anybody for that job?" And they said, "Oh, actually, yeah, we've got some more applications, so we've extended the closing date." And then that sort of the energy of that, and the new closing date was tomorrow. So that sort of deadline gave me the kind of the kick and the energy to go on and apply. And then the next week I got a phone call in the hospital to say, "Look, we know you're probably very busy in the hospital, but we'd love to interview you next week. Is there any way you could come over?" And unbelievably, from 3 months previous, I'd had a flight booked to London because of a conference I was going to in London, and I'd asked to get a Thursday and a Friday off work so I could go to this conference, which was from the Thursday to the Sunday. And my friend who was running the route, I said, no, I think you should take the Wednesday off as well. And I'm going like, no, I don't want to. I want to keep that in case I need it for a funeral or a wedding. And he said, no, take it. And I was like, okay, I'll take it. And so I thought, well, I'll just go over a day early for the conference. I'll do some sightseeing in London, and then I'll start the conference on the Thursday. So that's back 3 months previous in February. Now fast forward to the end of May, the start of June, and this phone call comes through and said, "Look, we'd love to interview you for this job next week." And I said, "You're not going to believe this, but for 3 months I've had a flight booked to England for that week." And they said, "Look, sorry to be even fussier, but the only day we could interview you is Wednesday." And I was like, joking, that's unbelievable. I literally am flying in on Tuesday night with nothing to do on Wednesday. And it gets better. It gets better, George. That lunchtime I went down to the computer room at the hospital, and I searched for information about this organization called Youth for Christ because I didn't know too much about them in England. And they had, it was the early days of the internet. So when you searched for it, it was like 1997. So you searched, I only found one document, and it was a Youth for Christ strategy document. And because it was a strategy document, it had a verse, it had across the top of the document, it had a verse from Isaiah in the Bible saying, "This is the way, walk ye in it." That's what was written across the top of the screen. So I just took some notes thinking, right, this will help me bluff my way in the interview. And I didn't think anything more of it until after lunch. I went back upstairs to the cardiology ward that I was working on at the time. And there's a nurse called Caroline, the phlebotomist who, takes the blood samples. She came up to me and she said, "Andrew, it's really strange. I was praying for you at lunchtime, and I felt God gave me a verse for you. And it was the verse, 'This is the way, walk ye in it.' I don't know where it is, but it's 'This is the way, walk ye in it.'" I just said, I was like, oh my goodness, let me tell you what I've just been doing, Caroline. That's just unbelievable. So that happened, and I won't bore you with any. That's a long explanation, but basically, so much. What you could look at that and say, "Oh, that's just coincidence." But 3, 4, 5 coincidences later, you realize this is not a coincidence. I'm being steered here, and looking back, 30 years later, I'm now very glad that I was, because it's been the most incredible adventure and the most wonderful thing.
Well, you gave us a little insight there into your entry into music, but surely you must have been prolific, or not so much prolific, but pretty proficient in music before you went for the interview. So tell us a little bit how you got involved in music in the first place, because I know most Irish families are musical anyway. So what was it like for you?
Yeah, it really came through that process of finding out about some of the state of the world, and the way that seemed natural to me to shout about that was to write songs about it. That's really what got me energized, and that's what got me thinking. I really wonderful friend called Andy McCallion, who I lived with, who was a lot further down the track than me, who had been writing songs for a while and was a really good guitarist. So I learned an awful lot from Andy and listened to him writing songs and sitting there singing them. And I thought, I think I could do that as well. And I started writing songs, just started scribbling. So during my student years, it just ended up like 40 or 50 songs, like they just all just kind of spewed out of me. And I couldn't describe how it happened or what happened. I think it was something of God getting planted in me and then coming out of me. Because I didn't feel like I was in control of the process, and it was certainly a new thing to me. It was not something I'd grown up doing. Never known how to write songs. Never been presented to me as an idea, to be honest. So yeah, but I guess I had played guitar a bit at home, and my mum had played piano, and I'd learnt piano, and I played violin. I'd been leader of my primary school orchestra playing violin, but then I got to secondary school and I didn't really enjoy violin. And then I pretended that I was practicing, but I got busted by my violin teacher who, he would say, so how much did you practice this week, Andrew? And I would say, oh, half an hour every night, like you told me to. And he said, look, if you practice this for even one day for 10 minutes, you'd be able to play it, and you can't. I was like, one of my first experiences of life of just being, busted, absolutely busted by a violin teacher. So I guess I picked up the guitar whenever I sat down the violin. And I've never looked back since, really.
Excellent. Now, you mentioned, of course, Youth for Christ, which is a very well-known organisation in the UK. But did you grow up in a Christian family, and did you learn about Christ in the family, or did you go to church and stuff like that?
Yeah, very much so. My mum and dad were very involved in their local church, both in Portadown and then also when we lived in Jordanstown and in Glengormley. And in fact, they were involved in running like Sunday school, the stuff that would happen after church for the kids. They were always doing that. And in fact, quite often I would see my mum sitting with her head bowed with one of the girls from her Sunday school class afterwards. And I remember saying to my mum, like, Mum, what's going on? Why are you sitting with your head bowed with one of the girls afterwards? And she said, oh, they're becoming a Christian. They're deciding to follow Jesus in their lives. They're asking Jesus into their hearts, was the sort of the phrase that was used at the time. And I just said, well, can I do that too? And I remember sitting by my bed, age 7, doing that with my mum. And I think that was, for me, that was the start of a journey of like this, not just being like religion, not just being this kind of thing that's out there somewhere as an idea or a concept or a theory, but it was a relationship. I was actually communicating. I was actually talking to the divine being, and that he wanted to talk to me, and he wanted to be present with me. And that was quite incredible. I think it grew in me. I remember a summer camp where we were all singing a song, and I'd sung plenty of songs in my life. Growing up in an Irish family, you sing plenty of songs, but for the first time, sitting with a bunch of about 30 lads in a little school hall in Newcastle, County Down, and I thought, do you know what? This is an amazing experience when you actually sing these words to somebody. Yeah, it's like a whole other thing. This is not just singing. This is not like just a crowd of men singing at a football match. This is not just a whole crowd of men or women sitting in a pub feeling good because they're all singing the same thing. This is like, I'm actually feeling something totally different here because I'm actually singing the words for the first time in my life to somebody. And that's making all the difference. That just feels real. It feels incredible. It feels precious. It feels intimate. It feels special. And I just felt the warmth of that, and felt how, and so for me, that those two moments were when it really clicked in for me that this is like a personal thing, getting to know God, that it wasn't just a a theoretical thing, and that there's just deep joy in that, because let's face it, life is really hard sometimes.
Yep.
We've been through some crazy medical stuff these last few years, and the world's been through some crazy stuff, and it's a bit like Mary. There's a story, people would know the Song of Mary. Certainly lots of people from our part of the world, from Ireland, know that would be called the Magnificat. Part of in Luke's gospel in the Bible, when Mary knows that she's going to be the mother of Jesus, and she goes to meet her cousin Elizabeth, and they have a chat, and then it inspires this wonderful song that Mary breaks out and sings, and it's the most incredible, beautiful thing. And she knows there's a deep knowing in her that even though she doesn't know what's going on, this crazy situation where she's being ostracized and sent away from her people because she's pregnant without being married, and also she's like, they're under oppression from the Romans and they're having to move around. There's a lot practically going on there, and then she's being told that she's going to bring up the Messiah, which is like a ridiculous thing for like a teenager to take on board. And yet she is singing, almost in the face of reality. She is singing, she is crying out. And it's like, I often say to people, I was talking to people before Christmas, and I was saying, like, it's not, when a mother sings over a child, it's the most beautiful thing. When you hear a mother singing over a child, now some of us have experienced that in the room as fathers and mothers. We've seen people singing over a child, or maybe we've been that person singing over a child, or we can even remember a parent singing over it. It's a beautiful thing when a parent sings over a child, but it's not a sort of statistical analysis. It's not a cost benefit analysis of saying, well, generally the good is going to outweigh the bad, and we don't know that in life. We genuinely don't know that. Like, sometimes the bad does outweigh the good in some really shocking situations. Some friends of ours, just awful situation in Luton, where our friend Lucy just died from a blood clot in her brain before Christmas.
Wow.
Nobody can explain that or know what's going on with that. But so, like, this idea of singing and crying out, and the joy that comes from connecting with your maker, and connecting with why you're here. It's not a calculation. It's something organic, and it's something that just comes and rises up out of you. And I think I just felt that day. I felt like, this is just like, whoa, this is incredible. That, like, no matter what life throws at you, this connection, this sense of like, I understand who I am. I understand why I'm here, and I'm not always going to get everything right, but boy, am I thankful that I've been made, and I can experience the beauty of this wonderful world, and I can be involved in trying to see it made new. My participation that God wants in seeing this world made new is just a precious, wonderful thing. But it's not like a mother singing over her child. It's not a cost benefit analysis. It's not a calculation. It's something more deep and profound than that. It's a crying out. It's going like, even though cancer is happening, even though COVID is happening, even though there is a bigger, deeper, broader story, and there's something beautiful going on here, even if it at times is painful.
And how did you develop your musical skills then from there, and singing and playing in venues? How did that develop for you?
It was while we were students, the final years of my medical school days. We just started getting asked to go and play in at events, festivals, clubs, pubs, churches. And so anywhere we were asked, we went. We're young, ambitious, enthusiastic men. Me and my mate Pete Ryan would go out. He was the one who kind of knew what he was doing. I was just full of ideas, but he, had a PA and had a bit more musical skill than I did. So the two of us did stuff together. Anyway, we were asked, and we learned a lot doing that. We made a lot of mistakes as well, and didn't know what we were doing half the time, but it was an adventure. It was amazing, and we met some amazing people, and some people who I'm still in touch with now to this day. And then that kind of, when I made the move over to England, then that sort of got industrialized, and did even more of it then, officially on the road with that band for 3 years, and then more doing my own solo stuff. I think that's when I realized that, yes, I enjoyed playing in bands, but actually there's something of me, and there's the kind of storyteller in me. I love telling a story, and therefore quite often when I'm doing a gig, I'm talking as much as I'm singing. You know, I'm telling the stories of the songs.
There's a surprise for an Irishman.
Yeah, I know. How surprising is that? You know, so I think I realized, well, I don't want to drag anybody else through this. So quite often it's just me going to do it with me and the guitar. And so like all those musicians are sitting there on stage just twiddling their thumbs while I'm talking. So I'm thinking, so that's when I started doing more stuff on my own, or just maybe with one or two musicians, you know, with bass and cello or some rhythm, but not the full band thing. So that's how that kind of evolved.
So when you made the transition, say you were a doctor at the time, and you decided, okay, I'm off to London or wherever, I'm going to do this band business. How did your parents react?
Yeah, no, they weren't that impressed, as you can imagine, as I mentioned earlier. You know, and fair enough, because I don't blame them for that, because I think I was just reaping what I'd sowed from bad communication during my student days. For all the folks who'd been in my medical year with me, who had seen what I'd got up to during medical school, it kind of made a lot of sense to them, you know, because they're like, oh, right, yeah, Andy's passionate, doing all, organizing events, communicating, singing, you know, that kind of makes sense. They could see that. Whereas I think when I rang home from university to my mum and dad, I was probably just in reassurance mode, making sure that they knew that the work was getting done and the studies were getting done, and telling them about that. So I think I was probably filtering out a lot of the musical, information. I mean, they knew it to some extent, but not to the extent that I should have let them in on it. And you know, let's face it, a medical existence is a much more stable one than a musical existence.
Absolutely.
And we all want our kin. I know the experience. I've got a lovely 11-year-old and 9-year-old in the house here with me, my kids, and I know those same feelings now myself. So yes, but I think as time went on, and a lovely thing that happened is that our band actually came and did a week of work with my dad in my dad's school, and did some assemblies, did some concerts at lunchtime, did a concert at the end of the week in the school, taught some RE classes and some music workshops, and I think it was really lovely then, because Dad was able to see the value in what we did, which was wonderful.
What was the name of the band?
Pardon?
What was the name of the band?
His name was called TVB.
TVB, yeah. TVB. The band itself? TVB, the worship band.
Which originally stood for the vocal band, and then they started doing less vocals, so they just called it TVB. They decided that wasn't so cool. So that was a wonderful 3 years working with those guys, and then increasingly after that time, I was then training other people to do similar work. But it was a wonderful format, you know, working in, you know, we'd go into a town and we'd manage to play concerts or do workshops or do lessons in like maybe 2, 3, 4 schools in a town, and then invite all the kids together to a big event at the end of the week. And you know, and the sort of the theming of the lessons was all around, you know, belonging, our self-image, and, you know, offering some answers, not just asking the questions, but offering some answers. And being really upfront about, you know, why, telling our stories about why, and some of those issues and some of the challenges that we'd faced in our lives, that we found that actually getting to know God was the answer to so many of those questions. And through that process, so many of those young people that we knew got to know God, and we would work in conjunction with local youth workers. So it wasn't a kind of just a hit and run type thing. We'd arrive, we'd be working with some of the local church youth workers, and then they would actually then pick up once we'd come in and shared the stuff, and people had come to faith, and people had really been, a lot of people were just really quite shocked and struck by the stuff that was shared. And, you know, some people had really transformative experiences. It was amazing, the stories that we used to, it was the days before email was very prevalent, and so we would get these wonderful letters on the road that would come through to us from these young people who had been really struggling with stuff in and around their self-image, with eating disorders, with bullying, with various things, and, you know, and they'd really experienced incredible transformations because they got to know God. And so, you know, it had made, so it wasn't just like, oh, there's another tick box, you know, that they're now calling themselves Christian, and it's just a kind of a head count, but it's just like the transformation that had actually happened in the real world of their lives, and to hear the stories from the horse's mouth was just, it was really precious. It was amazing.
Now, did you make a living from that, or were you just sleeping in church halls or wherever people put you up or whatever?
You had to raise your own support from people who supported you. So we're very, very blessed to have various folks who I would send a letter to, who would regularly give donations to Youth for Christ, and then Youth for Christ would find some funding for it as well. So yes, it's very much kind of on the hoof, shall we say.
Yeah. Now, I was going to ask you, of course, the Christian music industry has changed significantly in the past few years. Did you think you were a bit of a rock star when you were going around with the band at the time?
I don't think I ever thought I was a rock star. I was always the older guy. I was Uncle Andy. I had a beard even then. So the screaming was happening for all the 20-somethings that I was looking after, not for me. So I was on stage for some of the songs, but not for the majority of the songs. So it was me to be kind of looking after the thing, and then doing the speaking at the end of the evening and that sort of stuff. So I don't think I was under any false impressions. Now, I'm not saying for a second that there wasn't, as a 20-something, there wasn't plenty of ego going on there. And then then when I was doing my solo work as well, there's plenty of ego involved in that. And gosh, and looking back, I really wish there'd been less. You're not immune to that just because you're putting a Christian banner over yourself. You suddenly don't make yourself immune to all those challenges. And sadly, we see plenty of people who have been involved for good reason, but who get involved in that world, and then stuff comes off the rails because fame goes to people's heads. And actually, when you talk about the Christian music industry, the same is true in the folk music industry or the classical, and any sort of small little subset of the world, where it's easier to become a big fish in a slightly smaller pond in one of those subsets. And that's certainly true in the world of the church. I think one of my passions in training young people who get involved in music who are Christians is to say, look, actually, don't be tempted by becoming a bigger fish in a smaller pond. I think actually maybe the skills you've been given are designed to go out to the wider world. Do the harder yards of getting your music out there to the wider world, rather than just hiding in the little subculture of the church. It's been a big part of what I'm trying to do, is trying to encourage people to do that.
Now, when you look at today's music in the Christian music industry, do you have any regrets or reservations, or does it upset you, or do you think it's going well? What was your opinion of it?
I think my sadness, looking at the big picture of Christian music over the course of the last 20, 30 years, is that what I would say there's been an industrialization, what you might call the military worship industrial complex, whereas we had a good spread of people writing music from the heart that were direct songs. You might call them vertical songs in the direction of God, and then also people writing horizontal songs, which are songs designed to communicate at a concert, at a performance, or just in somebody's ears. They're like songs that are designed to communicate, but there's been a real drop away in those sort of songs. Everybody now just is wanting to write worship songs, because that's where you get thousands of people together and you get hundreds of people together, and that, I think, that has created, I get a lot of emails from young men, especially, who are asking me, Andy, how can I get into worship? And I said, well, serve where you are, write songs for your context that describe what's going on in your world and what God's doing in your town or in your church. And then, and offer them and see if people want to sing them. And then I'll get the email back that says, yes, but how do I get into worship? And really what that young 20-something male is asking me is, how can I stand on a stage in front of 1,000 people? and we've created a subculture where actually the musicians and the worship leaders are almost like the high priests of that subculture, and we have to be responsible for that and realize that's actually quite dangerous. And I'll never forget going to Chennai in the southeast coast, used to be called Madras, southeast coast of India. We were there with our church, and we were working with a church there called Powerhouse Church, and they did this wonderful welcome ceremony for us, which is wonderful, beautiful, and dancing, tablas, sitars. The men were all wearing these amazing colorful robes, the ladies in their saris, this incredible ceremony of welcome. And it's beautiful, just so rich. And then they said, okay, right, and now we'd love to worship with you guys. And right at that point, all the saris and the robes were taken off. The tablas and the sitars were dragged off to the side of the stage, and a digital drum kit was dragged out into the middle, and an electric guitar was dragged out into the middle. And for the next 25 minutes, we sang British and American songs in English with these lovely Indian Christians. And I remember going up to them at the end of that and saying, that was so kind of you to just put that on for us. That was so welcoming, to do something that was like our thing, for us. Well, you prepared that. And they were going like, what do you mean? I'm going like, that you did music in our language, and they're going, oh, what? No, that's how we worship. And you're going like, what? Seriously? Their own natural indigenous music is being just cast aside, and it's like the new colonialism, just because we've got the resources and the funds to package stuff better and make it sound nicer and make it look better on videos with our snazzy lights and our snazzy staging, and then we just have to be aware of that power that we wield and how that is in a lot of parts of the world, and not just around the world, but also in the UK, is actually trampling indigenous creativity. So people thinking that to do worship well is like, it needs to sound incredible, there need to be flashing lights, there need to be smoke machines, there need to be all this stuff, which the folks that are involved in the industry, don't want to convey that. That's not what they want to convey. But actually the medium is often as important as the message. And so you are getting young people growing up thinking, well, that's how you do it, right? Rather than it actually being about your heart. It's about your communication. It's about your connection with God. And that can be artistic, that can be solo, that can be in a group of 10 people. But when we start making the big event the thing, like the high point of it, and those people, the high point of it, then we get into this celebrity worship thing. We get into the thing where people are never going to be happy. They're always wanting to go to the big event. And then when they're trying to sing the same song the next week in their dusty old church hall with an out-of-tune guitar and only 12 people there, and they're not getting the same tingles down their spine, then they're starting to think, well, God's not here. And that's because they picked up a really lazy theology, rather than saying, actually, no, there's some sociological, psychological things happen when there's 3,000 of us in a big tent. When we do that, it's a bit like being in a football match, where there's a positive feedback loop happening, which is giving everybody this warm, fuzzy feeling. Where with that 3,000 people paying 50 quid each to be there means we can probably afford an amazing PA and some great lights. And we'll get somebody who's a really good charismatic leader and a real expert musician, which again is going to make it feel better, which again is going to, let's be honest about all those psychological dynamics and musical dynamics that are going on, rather than lazily just saying, oh, that big event was amazing, God really showed up. Because if we use that lazy language, that means when that young person is, as I said, a week later trying to reproduce it in their church hall, the same shivers down the spine, then they're thinking, oh, well, God hasn't turned up. And they think God's at the big place, rather than embracing the beauty of the small and embracing the beauty of the big. That actually you can do things in the small that you'd never be able to do in the big, but you can do things in the big that you never do in the small. But let's just be honest about why those things are happening.
You mentioned there about like the lyrics in the songs and what have you. I mean, I look at a lot of modern lyrics in songs, and to be honest with you, it annoys me because the words are there, the true words, but they don't seem to be connected. They seem to be taking the sentence. They don't seem to be put together. They don't seem to join up like a proper sentence. Do you ever feel that way?
Yeah, well, I feel like that's what happens when you're not actually living in the real world, when you're just living in a bubble in this kind of worship military industrial complex. When you're living in that bubble, all you're doing is regurgitating cliches. So it's what you're describing. Is that like we're hearing the same phrases come round and round again, and it's I call it sanctuary language. It makes people that are spending all their time in a sanctuary feel good. It kind of it's like nostalgia. It's the same. It's the same sort of psychological dynamic as nostalgia. When we hear these things that we've been so used to hearing, but sometimes they're devoid of their actual spiritual power. Because, when you look at how David wrote songs in the Psalms, he was writing about his present context. We've been working really hard to try and improve the quality. We're doing a project called Boundless with the London Institute of Contemporary Christianity, which is getting songwriters together to really write songs that have a depth of theology and a breadth of theology. That mean that we're taking the example of the Psalms in the Bible, where David, wrote so many of those, and so many of those, I think Mark Green worked out 71 out of 150 Psalms were battle Psalms. They were written crying out for help. We like the idea of David as the king. We like the idea of David as the kind of shepherd boy or the guitar playing worship leader. That's but we forget that the reason David was famous was what he was really good at was being a soldier. That's what he was. And those Psalms were written into his real world context. He was crying out for help. And we've spiritualized all those battle Psalms to sort of, oh, help us in the spiritual battle. He was actually asking for help in the real battle. He was asking for help in those real moments where his life was actually in danger, where there were people coming over the hill and there were people hiding behind, and so that if we take our pattern from that biblical example of that's how we really honestly communicate with God, and sometimes that means being angry, sometimes that means articulating our disappointment, sometimes that means articulating our sadness. So rather than just singing this stuff that is kind of anodyne, cliched, happy, clappy, everything's the same all the time, let's write about where we are. Let's write about the experiences. Let's use the metaphors of here and now in the same way that David used the metaphors of the fields and a shepherd and a tower. I don't know about you, George, but like there's not many. The name of the Lord is a strong tower. I haven't recently run away from any Vikings to the top of a tower. I haven't had to do that recently. So it's hard for me to step into that metaphor properly, And we forget that when David said, the Lord is my shepherd, it's probably one of the most famous statements in all of the Bible. Whether people listening to this are Christians or not, you probably heard people say, the Lord is my shepherd. And now we go, oh yeah, okay, the Lord is my shepherd, I get that. But when he first said that, we forget that everybody would have gone, what? The Lord is my shepherd? The shepherds were these people that were looked down on. And people would have gone like, the Lord is my shepherd? No, hang on. He's not. What, so you said God's like a shepherd? Oh, right, okay, I get that. He's like, so in a way he is like a shepherd, but in ways he's not like a shepherd. And so that's because that's what imagery is. We're comparing something to something else, and it's never going to be perfectly like that thing. But because we get scared and we step away from actually using modern day language and modern day imagery to actually, in a way that people who have never been anywhere near God or never anywhere near church will actually understand what we're talking about, whether we're talking about concrete or mobile phones or apps or whatever it is that is actually meaningful to people. So we're encouraging folks to use real world language and to talk about the reality of the 9 to 5 in the words that we write. So it's not just what you're talking about, that regurgitation of phrases that never seems to go anywhere.
Do you think that's something that's in the Irish people? They say what you see.
Yes, absolutely. Like Roy Walker on Catchphrase.
Yeah, say what you see. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's always been. It's the storytelling about the Irish thing. We do that. We tell it, and we don't. And we're sort of being unabashed about it, not unvarnished. You might say unvarnished. And I just fear that so much of what we sing these days has become very, very varnished, both in sort of pop music culture, but also in the world of church music and Christian music. We're so busy varnishing things that it's not actually real and it's not actually connecting with people anymore.
Tell me then, how would you construct a song or write a song? How does it happen for you as a songwriter?
It's usually an idea or a word or a phrase that jumps out at me. And well, I'll give you an example. One recently, the idea of again trying to bring a modern word to express something ancient and something eternal. The word renovation. I think we were sitting there talking to friends who were doing some renovating in their house, and it was an absolute nightmare. They were having to live in just 2 or 3 rooms of the house while this extension was being put on, and they were renovating the whole thing. And it just really brought home to me that renovation is not necessarily a pleasant process, but there's a really good outcome that's really worth it. And I guess the image there is talking about how we believe. Christians believe that we are going to, even though we are in a tough place right now in terms of everything going on in the world, that actually the end of the story is a good ending. That where we get to, the new heavens and the new earth, where all of this stuff will be transformed and redeemed, and we believe reconciled to its creator, where stuff will be perfected. That's a really good end of the story. And so I ended up writing this song that talked about, this is a time of renovation. This is the future information, that even these small encouraging bits of positivity that we see that demonstrate that perfect future, encouraging people to latch onto those and grab onto them. One of the phrases like, this is the workshop of your kingdom. These are the tools that fashion freedom. So again, but it all started from that first word renovation of thinking, right, the general metaphor here is building, and pulling things together. So
do you get a tune with that?
I'll sit down with a guitar, get a few. I'll start just mumbling.
I know the feeling. I've done it plenty times.
random vowel sounds, you know.
Yes. You mentioned earlier that when you were singing your song to some people in Newcastle West, you said it was fantastic. Okay. You've done a couple of albums, of course. One of them, "Drowning in the Shallow," which was like acclaimed as near perfect. How do you feel now when other people sing your songs? How do you feel?
It's pretty. It's an incredible feeling. It's one of the most precious feelings, George. It's amazing. Mm-hmm. It's really special. It feels really humbling, and it feels like, well, I guess what I've always tried to do is in my songs is to try and, what people have often reported to me is that, like, oh, what you said really expressed really deeply how I felt about that, but I didn't really know it yet. But I hadn't found words for it. And it feels like, you know, that happened when we wrote a song just after the Queen had died. So many people got back to me and said, like, that really expressed what I was feeling, but I hadn't been able to find the words. And I guess that's a really special feeling for a songwriter, that people are saying, right, okay, you've helped me articulate something, even though it was kind of buried deep down here, but it was in there, but you've helped me get that out. And so that goes to a whole other level then when it's a song that when they actually start singing that song, and you realize that people are able to use that to connect with one another and with God. That feels like a real privilege. That's an amazing thing.
Have you got a new album on the back burner at the minute then? Yeah,
very much so. So, well, there's two main projects. There's my own album coming out with sort of like hands in the air, feet in the dirt. That's what it's going to be called.
Okay.
Probably later on this year. But the project I'm talking about that we're working on with the London Institute of Contemporary Christianity and Integrity Music is called Boundless. And that's getting some of the top songwriters in the UK together to write some of these songs that are really, really attentive to the words and using modern day phraseology and metaphor, and songs that we really believe that people will relate to in their 9 to 5, not just songs that will work not just on a Sunday, but from Monday through to Saturday as well.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, mentioned there working with other songwriters. Did you ever get to work with Robin and Mark? I mean, he's one of my favorites, I would say.
Robin's a wonderful fella. I've done some things with him over the years. I've sadly never written a song with him. That would be a wonderful thing to do. But yeah, Robin's a leading light in this world. Yeah. And perfect example of what we were talking about earlier. I'll never forget. Getting a letter from somebody who had been leading worship with an American worship leader who shall remain nameless, who had been fairly pernickety, saying he was in the band working with this American worship leader, and he was saying, oh no, you're singing the alto line, can you sing the tenor line please? No, don't play it like it is on the album, you know, like really
yeah.
And they said, and then in week 2 Rob and Mark turned up, and they said Robin's attitude to worship leading can be best described as play what you want and mine's a Guinness.
So basically on the fly, basically he played whatever the Lord led him to do at the time.
Wonderful man. And you know, those songs speak for themselves. You know, they're being sung all over the world by so many people. I don't know if you've seen any of the videos of whole bunches of army, bunches of military folks around the world singing his songs. It's a sight to see.
Now, of course, music is not your only project. You went from music, dare I say it, to politics.
Yeah.
How did that come about? How did to encourage people to get into politics?
It was the music that led me into the political realm, because as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the songs that I was writing were complaining or trying to educate people about the state of the world economic system, and whether it was sweatshops in Bangladesh, whether it was orphanages in Uganda, whether it was people being persecuted for their faith in Egypt, I was increasingly being taken away on trips by agencies like Christian Aid, Oxfam, Clear Fund, Oasis, open doors, these sort of folks to see situations and then come back and sing songs about them. And and I was doing things for another organization called Speak that was trying to, I think a lot of those organizations in the late 90s, early noughties, people would have known them as sort of fundraising organizations. You know, give us your money to send off to famine in Africa. And as we all went through a process of learning in those days, that actually it was not enough to just send money off randomly, that actually that fell down a pit unless we actually did something about the trade rules, unless we did something about debt, and unless we did and allowed them to trade their way out of their own problems rather than just, you know, giving handouts that actually wouldn't be ultimately effective. And so those agencies were increasingly lobbying and campaigning for some of those world trade rules to change, and some of those systems to change to governments around the world. And so increasingly I was being asked to sing to or speak to politicians and folks in Parliament. And when I was there, what became patently clear to me was that there was no magic dust in Parliament. There was nobody operating on a higher moral, spiritual, or intellectual plane than a lot of the people I've been working with in the world of NGOs and the church, that actually realized these are, you know, folks doing a really tough job, doing their best in a tough job, but, you know, nothing special going on here. Realizing actually, I think we need to create a bridge so that people with real strategic insight, wisdom, and energy from civic society, from outside the traditional worlds of politics, of people who got into politics, need to get involved in politics. That actually politics would be a better thing with normal people getting involved in it, especially people who are believers getting involved in it, can only be the better for the antiseptic effect of it. And so, yeah, doors opened that I was able to get involved, and and the rest is history. I won't bore you with the long story, but I ended up getting very involved in Parliament and a lot of the stuff going on there, and I've been involved ever since, really.
I mean, let's face it, politicians don't have a good name in any sense of the word, but do you think Christians should get involved in politics and really try and make a change in the world?
Absolutely. I often, if somebody comes up to me and says, "Oh, Andy, I don't really get into politics. I don't really care about politics." And I'll ask them, well, but do you care about people? You know, I give the example of our neighbour Frank in our estate, who lived beside us in London. Jesus said, "Love your neighbour as yourself." You know,
yep.
And it's a profound statement that we don't often really think about very much. You know, I often ask people at meetings, well, what does it mean to love yourself? How do you love yourself? And the truth is, we love ourselves by a whole range of day-to-day life strategies that keep the show of life on the road. You know, we clean our teeth. Yep. We make sure we've got a national insurance number. We try to get a roof over our heads. We try to get a job. We try to form into communities so that we're not lonely. You know, we actually try to look after our health. There's a whole set of practical things that we do to love ourselves, to look after ourselves. And Jesus said, "Love your neighbor as you love yourself." And so we have to care about all those practical things for our neighbors as well, if we're meant to love them in the way that we love ourselves. Otherwise, that statement just doesn't make any sense. And it also makes sense because there's no point in me loving my neighbor Frank. You know, it's all very well for me to say, "Oh, Frank, I love you," but Frank's really struggling to get down the stairs in our block of flats because the lift's broken. So to love Frank, I have to worry about getting that lift fixed. You know, to love Frank, I have to care about the fact that there's no bus to get him to the GP. I have to care about the fact that there's no appointments at the GP surgery so that he can get his knee seen to. I need to care about the fact that there's a waiting list for him to get his knee surgery at the local hospital. You know, for me to just care about him in a vacuum and just love him in a vacuum doesn't make any sense whatsoever. To me to actually love him means I need to care about all those things. So I quite often say to people, look, if you care about people, you've got to care about politics.
Yeah.
None of us love people in a vacuum. It's a nonsense to think that we do. And, you know, and yes, there's plenty to scrutinize and criticize about politics, but my bath has never got cleaner by me standing outside it saying, "Be clean, be clean." My bath has only ever got cleaner by me getting on the inside of it and scrubbing it. And I think sometimes we just create these little ivory towers for ourselves, you know. People will often say to me, "Oh, Andy, bless you for what you're doing in politics, bless you for what you're doing. I couldn't do it. I know if I did it, I fear I would be polluted. I fear I would be corrupted. you know. And at that point, I'll usually say, look, can I let you in on a secret? You already are polluted. You already are corrupted. You know,
Yeah.
I could talk about the crystal in your mobile phones that have been harvested from slave labor in sub-Saharan Africa. I could talk about the petrol you put in your car, that's like from Middle Eastern states that are actively oppressing Christians and oppressing women. I could talk about where your pensions landed, and all the investments that are actually supporting the arms trade to some shocking regimes around the country. We could talk about your mortgage. We could talk about your broadband. We could, the bottom line is that we are involved in a fallen world. We are involved in a messed up system in ways that are probably more profound with our wallet, in ways that are probably more profound than just where we put an X on a voting card.
Yeah.
And so to say that, I couldn't be involved in that, the question is not should we be involved. We are involved.
Yeah.
We are actively involved every day, and we are guilty. We are involved. So the question is like, shall we get involved to see this thing improved? And that's what we're calling people to with Christians in politics. And it's wonderful to see people having an impact and shining. Yeah. And because what we forget often, if you're the sort of person who's grown up in a church, you forget that the church is one of the few places in the UK. The church and Weight Watchers are the only places that are still growing in the UK in terms of weekly groupings. People aren't getting together in large numbers anymore. No. It's the church and Weight Watchers, and you learn things from being part of a group of people. You learn public speaking skills, you learn communication skills, you learn conflict resolution skills, you learn how to organize a rota. And we forget there's a real head start. If you've been involved in something like the church, you are really well placed to serve in the realm of politics. And often the church is so involved in communities, reaching out to the most needy and the marginalized, and involved in so many amazing programs, projects, food banks, debt advice centers, working with young people, working with parents and toddlers. Folks, the church is so well interfaced with so many of the challenges in any given community. Often members of the church are best placed to represent those communities because they know best what's going on in them.
Amen.
So actually, there's a head start for Christians to be serving in the realm of politics in that public way.
You mentioned there, about making an impact. You've already made an impact, of course, with the National Prayer Breakfast. Tell us what the impact was with that. Was it in 2022?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'd like to think that it does have an impact every year that we do it. But yes, there was a particularly wild thing happened in 2022 that you may have heard about, and that, how best to put it, there was an amazing moment. Les Isaac, the wonderful preacher, actually stopped 4 minutes early. And I thought, gosh, here's an opportunity. We've got a bit of space. And it's pretty intimidating to do music. You've got Keir Starmer sitting there, Boris Johnson sitting there, Justin Welby sitting there. It's a little bit intimidating. But I really felt like we could leave some space. These people we've been picking up from, there's like 700 people in the room, and you're realizing how tired and how post-COVID, how struggling a lot of these people are, and just felt a lot of the pain in the room. And I thought it'd be great to just play something that's healing. And Lucy Clasper, my amazing friend who plays cello, we just set a drone and she played cello, and it was just beautiful. You can see it on YouTube if you type in Holy Moments Flannagan into YouTube from the prayer breakfast. You'll see this incredible thing that happened when she played cello. And I got these messages from MPs saying, like, that is the first time that I have had peace and silence and sanctuary in 2 years. Literally people were going like, what was that? What just happened? Something mad in the room happened as she played. And there was just this beautiful holy moment of silence, of power in the room. It was just incredible. I drove home that day. I was still shaking. I was shaking.
Wow.
Thinking, like, what on earth happened there? And well, one of the things that happened, we found out at tea time, was that Sajid Javid, who was health secretary at the time, said, I can't with any integrity stand with the government anymore. And he resigned, and Rishi Sunak resigned with him. And then the next morning, Sajid Javid stood up in Parliament and said, look, it's because of what I experienced at the prayer breakfast yesterday morning that I've resigned. And that was the first domino that, 2 days later, Boris Johnson had to resign. That was, a government changed because of what happened. And, at the start of that gathering, we'd sung the famous hymn, Praise My Soul, the King of Heaven. And I felt really challenged to challenge those leaders that I was stood in front of. I said, we're going to sing this final verse, which says, angels in the heights adore him, ye behold him face to face. But I said, it's not often you get to sing those words. True. When you're actually stood underneath the beautiful wooden angels that are carved into the roof of Westminster Hall. And I said, look, it's not an accident that those wooden angels are up there. That's part of the design of this building.
Yeah.
Those who designed this building wanted to make sure that those who would walk and work below in the future were reminded where ultimate authority lay. That the buck did not stop with them, but ultimate authority lay elsewhere. And the fact that we were sort of brazen in saying that. And I think more people than normal. We had 160 MPs that morning and 30 members of the House of Lords, more than we've ever had at the prayer breakfast. And it felt like more people than normal were acknowledging that reality, acknowledging that ultimate authority lay elsewhere. And I think that's why something spectacular happened that morning.
Excellent.
That continues to have ripple effects from now.
And as far as the future concerned, do you have any plans or any campaigns going on at the moment?
Always got plans, George. It's always fun. I think most immediately the Boundless songs, we're recording them in London on next Wednesday. And
excellent.
Those will be released gradually over the course of the next year. So watch out for those songs. They're called Boundless.
Is that the name of the album?
We hope some really significant songs. My album probably towards the end of the year.
Excellent.
We'll get the new. That'll be Hands in the Air, Feet in the Dirt. We'll get that out by the end of the year, hopefully.
I wanted to ask you as well.
And then also, I guess my passion at the moment is working with a lot of the younger folks who get involved in politics, training. I'm getting old in the tooth now, and my job is primarily to be training up the younger folks who get involved. So we have a thing called the Ambassadors Program, and if anybody's watching this that would like to be involved, get in touch. Just Andy at christiansinpolitics.org.uk. Get in touch. We do really high level public speaking training, communication training, media skills, interview training, because it's a tough world out there, as you know, the toxicity of social media, the toxicity of the online space, and we don't want to send lambs amongst wolves to the slaughter. We want to train people well to be able to represent their faith well out there and to bring what they can bring, that they can be salt and light and not get knocked back. By realizing that there will be times when people are knocked back. Nobody ever promised this would be easy, but to actually help tool people up so that they can do it not as lone rangers, but they can do it in groups and do it with other people, so that they're supporting each other and holding each other accountable. Because I've also seen too many people fall away over the course of the last few years as well. That's what we do. Call people together into groups to do this together. But some of the beautiful things that can happen when people do that, incredible. Some of the believers who've just been elected to Parliament this last year in the UK, it's been incredible to see them thriving.
Excellent.
Already having a really powerful impact. And if anybody's watching this that are the sort of people that pray, then do pray for those young believers who are in Parliament, because it's hard work. Some of them have young families. Some of them didn't think they were going to be in Parliament, and so are still trying to do their old jobs as well. It's very challenging for them. So there's a lot of great folks there. Don't believe the hype that they're all in it. The politicians I work with are in it for good reason. And there's a few bad apples, obviously, but most of the folks who are there are doing it because they really want to serve. And don't believe everything you just hear through the filter of the media, who have a vested interest in only printing the tragic and the scandalous and the worst stuff and drawing division out. You're not going to read about the cooperation. You're not going to read about the people from different parties praying together. You're not going to read about our prayer triplets of one yellow, one red, one blue, of folks who are like learning how to love one another and learning how to disagree well. You're not going to read about that in the papers, but it is happening.
You mentioned your new album there in your music. Then just wanted to ask you yourself, do you ever listen to your own music, and do you have a favorite song of your own?
I don't listen to it very often. I trying to work out whether I should tell this story. As many men of a certain age have to do, I had to have a medical procedure not that long ago, And the very enthusiastic surgeon who I'd had an interview with beforehand, a couple of weeks beforehand, he was very into folk music, and he found out that I was a musician, and he got very excited about that. And during the surgery, he said, "Oh, why don't you sing to us?" And I said, "I really don't want to sing." And he said, "Well, I'm sure you must have some of your music on the phone." And I said, "No, actually, I don't." He said, "Oh, but I'm sure you have a YouTube channel, don't you?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I guess I do." He said, "Hang on, I'll go and get the Wi-Fi password, and we'll play some stuff on YouTube." And so during this procedure, he forced me to listen to myself on YouTube. And actually, it was revelatory. It was a really good way of taking my mind off it, because I was listening to all my old songs, going, "Oh, if I could do that again."
Yeah.
I'm not sure about that harmony. I think I changed those words now. So that, yes, that is definitely a moment where I have listened to my own stuff. But funnier than that, George, I was I was thinking of this. We did an event on Saturday night in Exeter, and men from all over Devon had come, and I'd led worship, and I was just near the door on the way out, and somebody came up to me and he shook my hand and he said, "Thanks so much. Oh, you did a great job. I really enjoyed those songs tonight. That was fantastic." He said, "I hope you don't mind. Like me making comparisons and all. But do you know what? You really reminded me of a guy called Andy Flannagan, who I really like his." I thought, I've got that old already that this guy actually didn't recognize me. So yeah, I have thought a little bit about the generation shifting and listening to the old stuff quite a bit in the last few weeks.
Well, it's been fantastic speaking to you. I could speak to you all night, Andy, about music and worship and everything like that, but we do have to finish, of course, and thank you for speaking to us now. You've made lots of decisions in your life, good ones and bad ones. For you, what was the best decision you ever made?
Oh yeah, well, it's that decision I mentioned earlier. To go up to my mum and say, "What's going on when you're bowing your head with those girls at the end of your Sunday school class? What is going on there?" And I'm forever grateful that my mum took the time to explain that to me, and then took the time to sit beside my bed and say, "Well, look, you can pray that same prayer that those girls were praying. You can talk to God and say to Jesus that you want to follow him, and that you're sorry for what you've done wrong, and that you want to be his, and it's as simple as that, and you can just do that." And so I'd love to tell you that I've had sometimes it's more dramatic to tell stories of lots of things going wrong, but then I rebelled and I turned away, and then it was just all dark, and it was like, right. The truth is, honestly, and I know it's not the story for everybody, but honestly, I've never looked back since that moment, because God has been so faithful to me, and his presence has been so potent. And we've just had a really tough time this last little while with a couple of medical diagnoses in our family, which have been really serious, and just that sense of the peace in the storm. That peace is not the absence of conflict. Peace is not getting to the end of your jobs that you have to do and then being able to put your feet up. Peace comes from knowing the presence of the one who made you, with you, in the midst of the nonsense, in the midst of the pain, in the midst of the hurt, in the midst of the bad decisions, in the midst of the crazy stuff going on in the world. Peace comes from acknowledging the presence of somebody who is always there, but just wanting you to stop and recognize that he is there. And I am so much healthier when I am not being too busy, and I am stopping and thanking God for being present. The older I get, the more I realize that we're designed for surrender.
Mm-hmm.
Biologically, psychologically, we are designed for surrender. Mm-hmm. We are at our best when we are not trying to control the world and not getting angry that we can't control the world. We are designed for surrender. We are designed to stop and go, okay,
let go.
That has an amazing impact on your anxiety levels, an amazing impact on your panic levels, an amazing impact on your joy levels, that you can appreciate the simple stuff, and you don't need the fancy stuff, and you don't need the expensive stuff, that you can just go, right, Okay. I'm designed.
Excellent. Well, Andy, thank you so much.
If anybody wants to get in touch and thinking like, I kind of like the sound of that, but I don't really know how to make that happen, I'd love to chat more. If anybody wants to get in touch, feel free to.
What was that email address again? Andy at
christiansinpolitics.org.uk.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for speaking to us here at Life Stories Worldwide, of course. And with that, I'm going to hand back to Alan.
Thank you, George. Thank you so much, Andy. It's been great hearing you. What an amazing life you've had, and it's still going on. A lot of great things God has done with you, and He's going to use you, I'm sure, in the future to help many, many people. Thank you so much. It's been a real blessing hearing you. And
pleasure, John. Thanks, Alan.
You heard what Andy said. Even at a young age, he committed his life to Jesus, asked Jesus into his life, even at 7 years of age. And his life has been guided ever since. And as he said, there's a peace. There's a peace by having that relationship with the one who created you. And you can have that peace. You can know that same peace that Andy has. What you have to do is simply acknowledge to God that you're a sinner. And the Bible says we've all sinned. We've all come short of the glory of God. And that's why Jesus came and died on the cross. He died on the cross in your place to pay the penalty for your sins. Poured out his precious blood to wash your sins away. And if you acknowledge that you are a sinner and he died for you, then ask him to come into your heart. Invite him to come into your life, to be your Lord and Savior, to guide you, to give you that peace. He's waiting to come. He won't force himself into your life, but if you ask him, he will come and he will give you that peace. And he'll show you the purpose for your life. So do that. Please ask him. Say, Jesus, I know I'm a sinner. I can't save myself, but I believe you died for me on that cross, paying the penalty for my sins. Come into my life to be my Lord and my Savior. And I want to follow you from this day forward. If you do that, he will do it. Your life will be completely transformed. And if you do that, please let us know. You can go to our website, lifestoriesworldwide.com. There you'll find the salvation prayer link. You'll find a page on how can I get to know God. And you'll find a Bible app that you can download to help you to get to know this wonderful God and this wonderful Savior. So please do that. And let me invite you to join us again next week for another life story at 8 o'clock on lifestoriesworldwide.com. Next week, we have a young woman, well, not a young woman now, I knew when she was very young, Margaret Barraclough. Margaret is retired now. She had a tremendous change in her life and got a love for children. She became a nursery nurse. And then she became a school teacher. Although she wasn't very good at school, she became a school teacher and actually became a lecturer at a local university, a lecturer in education. And then later found out she was dyslexic. She's a wonderful story. That's next week at 8 o'clock. And also you can go to our YouTube channel, Life Stories Worldwide, where you can watch many stories from previous Mondays, many wonderful stories of how lives have been changed. And don't forget to click our the button for to be. You don't have to be a subscriber. You just click the subscription button and the like button, and that will help us in spreading this good news. So thank you for being with us. May you be blessed. May you know the peace of God that passes all human understanding, and may the joy of Jesus fill your heart. Bye, everyone.